Hey everyone, this is Tim from Phantom History House. This is part 2 of my conversation with author Douglas Ford. We're getting into some specifics here, so I hope that you have read the book or at least don't mind having some spoilers here. Hope you enjoy the rest of my conversation. Okay, good, good. So I thought it was a great setup. As someone that had tattoos, I would tell you this just as an aside, I never thought I would have tattoos ever. I was not that guy, ever. And then the day came when I was like, okay, I want to have this beast tattoo on me, and I want it on me. And I was so weird. And I went and met with this wonderful tattoo artist, Steve Roberts, in Orlando. And I was like describing these to him, like, I'm not a tattoo guy. But I really want this on me. And he was like, oh yeah, I totally get that. Like he understood that idea. And it turned out I am a tattoo guy. It's just the stereotypes of it, what were so interesting. I thought that was interesting because we're all bringing sort of these biases and cultural expectations of tattoo people and who has them and who doesn't and why. And I just thought that was a great hook for you to start with.
Thanks. And I have tattoos as well, and
Okay,
including one on my hand, which it's not really a spoiler alert, but it's hand tattoo is important in the story.
it is.
But the character in the story, Adam, is literally a blank slate, and in that regard, and he's not only a blank slate in that his skin is unadorned, but he's in many ways he's sort of like the fool card in the tarot deck. Is that this is really the beginning of a journey. And he has to be marked first. He has to have some kind of inscription to begin the journey. And I don't know if I'm ruining anything. Of course, we said
It's okay. Talk like everybody knows.
that the tarot really structured the narrative. I
Indeed.
played around with having chapter titles based on tarot cards, and the publisher said, no, it'll just be distracting. And we decided to go ahead and just number the chapters. And if people figure out or care about the tarot structure, then great. If they don't need it. So
But I thought that was a nice device for carrying that sort of supernatural
mhm.
tarot thing through the story. And so the fact that he ends up with a tattoo on his hand through this auspices of this opening thing, was that motivated because you have one on your hand? Was that why you decided to put it there?
I don't know. I've actually got two stories in my canon. I don't know if canon is the right word to use here, but I've also written another story about hand tattoo. So I think I like hand tattoos. It was in terms of getting a tattoo, it was the most interesting tattoo to get because your hand, there's something personal about your hands. You identify. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but hands are in some ways you can see a person's personality in their hands. And so it was very much it was a more intimate tattoo to get because somebody's working on my hand. And I should say, for transparency purposes, I don't have any place in a traditionally intimate area, any tattoos in a traditionally intimate area. So when I say this is there was something
Although
intimate.
someone in the book certainly did, but we're not going to talk about that part probably. Well, I wondered if you put it on his hand also because then everybody could see it. Like the hand is one of those places where you can't hide it. Like if you have it on your arm, you can wear a shirt but like
Yes.
I also thought that was important to the story because
Yeah.
Adam could not, like, it was very visible to everybody.
Right. And people want to hold it. And, we hold hands as a sign of intimacy. So people kept taking his hand, which he's uncomfortable with
Yeah,
intimacy.
yeah.
And because he hasn't experienced a lot of it. And so when people keep taking his hand, it really kind of forces a connection that he's learning how to deal with, a connection with each of these people that he encounters as a result of it.
Yeah, that was very interesting that he was so uncomfortable and everybody kept grabbing it to want to look at it. That was a really cool thing. All right, so now I have to ask you like the biggest question I have. You've already mentioned it, so I'm going to start asking you this. I thought the character of Adam was so interestingly chosen, the way you drew him, and like you called him just now a blank slate. Like I thought he was like almost devoid of personality. You know what I mean? Like I have to tell you, I had a hard time rooting for him because he was so like bland. And I'm sure that was intentional, but you know what I mean? Like he was like, oh, well, nobody usually likes me. And oh, I don't know how to deal with women. And like he was so
Well,
explain.
originally, the original version of Adam was kind of a jerk when I wrote the story originally, and I didn't like him. To me, what helped me connect with Adam in the present version was that he is in many ways innocent. There's a certain innocence to him that may come across as blandness, which I hope not too bland. But
I can
he
see
is
that.
in some ways stumbling through life. And there's a point where he mentions, I've never been outside of this town, which is
Right.
another sign of his blank
Right.
slate. So being inscripted with this tattoo in many ways forces him to form a self that he's not accustomed to, a self that can interface with the world and interact with the world, which by the way, the world is a tarot card. And that's in the end, of course, that leads to, because it's a horror novel, it leads to these unpleasant places in the end. So
The idea of him being sort of innocent and naive, actually, I can see how that would play into the idea of like he seems the least likely person to be able to handle this and deal with it. But I did struggle sometimes figuring out how to like him because I wanted to root for him and I was rooting for him, but sometimes I
yeah.
was just like, oh, could you're so devoid of personality. But anyway, I thought that's interesting. I see how that works in the way you were thinking about it. And actually, the whole cast of characters are really like a fascinating collection. Like, why would he have this wife, this Natalia, who's like that? That seemed crazy. Though when you describe how it happened and how he said
Your
yes,
carnality.
well, I think so. Obviously, and, she was sort of using him for some purpose, but like that was seemed unlikely. And then it's very interesting that the other main character, which is how do you say it? It's Maripin.
Maripin. Yes.
Maripin.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very, very interesting character. Of course, the tattoo artist that he sort of goes to find out what is this, and then she gets very wrapped up in the story, is a trans woman, and I thought that was a very interesting choice. Why did you decide to include that?
Um, and so that character kind of announced to me when I was drafting it that she was trans, and I can't really explain it. It kind of she needed to be for part of her struggle, for part of her transformation, for part of the wisdom she brings. In some ways, she escaped the kind of life that Adam had, and that Adam is in the process of escaping, and to become her true, who she truly is. She had to go through that. In the process, she became the artist that she is. And in the tarot, she would be the high priestess, which, of course, I kind of laid that one on the nose at one point with her business card. But she is the source of this hidden wisdom, in part because of what she had to go through, her own transformation, her own struggle, and which is alluded to later in the text.
Yeah, no, I
So
get that. And actually, it makes sense to me that she's sort of like the guide and the one that sort of helps him figure out, encourages him. So that's very interesting. That's kind of what I thought you were going to say, but that's very, very interesting. Um, okay, so the figure on his hand is okay, Baphomet. How do you say it?
Baphomet, yeah.
Okay, so I did a little research. Obviously, this is like a real thing. So I know that's important to the story and how it works. But let's talk about why you made that be what was on
In part because I really like Baphomet. I think he's a really interesting figure. I think and speaking of transformation, that's a figure who's gone through transformations from its origins, that go back, centuries, to where he now is sort of the mascot of the Satanic Temple, identified as kind of a Lucifer figure. And that allowed me to kind of offer, and of course, something happens with another character in terms of transformation into Baphomet later on. So and of course Baphomet is non-binary, and having about, you know, not really having a set gender in
Right.
terms of biological, in terms of how he's they, I should say, they are drawn in popular art. So it was just a fun figure to kind of work in, and because also Baphomet is popular with tattoo artists, and it's kind of, he's a renegade, and he represents a defiance to authority, and also allow me to tap into some, you know, some religious anxiety that people have about end times, as a figure who could prefigure that. It was just fun to do, and fun to, I knew somehow, when I write things, I don't always know how it ends. I'm what's called a pantser. I'm not a planner, and I kind of write because I
Wait, you're
want
called a what? A pant?
a pantser, by the seat of your pants, so to speak. When people talk, there's two. There's a planner, somebody who outlines,
Right.
and then there's pantsers.
I've
And
never
I'm
heard that phrase before. I can't. I love that so much. You're a pantser. Okay,
I'm
I
a
know a lot
pant.
of pantsers. I'm a planner, but I appreciate pantsers in the process.
Well, this is, I don't know if people have used it outside of writing, that term, but we tend to kind of, you know, figure out the plot as we go.
Let's see where
And
it takes you.
yeah, and I knew somehow there had to be a confrontation with Baphomet at some point, but I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know what form that should take. And it hit me one day how that should occur, that would allow me to circle back to some of the things that occurred earlier in the book. And I
Oh
had
yeah.
just so much fun writing that penultimate scene.
That is fascinating to me that you didn't know that's where you were going. I love that idea. Sometimes some of the best things I've worked on have been that way, but I'm usually pretty planny in my life. But I that's very interesting because it I will say that it all made perfect sense to me when that all went down and the people that sort of transformed and turned in like that whole scene. Um, I thought that I thought you would have planned that from the beginning. So that's to your credit, I guess, that it made so much sense to my head.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and then of course the whole thing about he works at the Grease and Go, which I love. That's so funny. And again, all of his clothing has this logo on it. Like he was just such a sad, like his life was so small, and maybe that's the whole point. Is like this, he seems so unlikely to go on such a grand, horrifying adventure because his life was so.
It was simple. It was not, he was in a comfort zone until, well, really until Natalia came along.
Mm,
Till Natalia showed up during the eclipse, and then he has that carnal experience with her in the backyard, and, you know, in the presence of her mother. And that was the beginning of the complication of his life, because of course Natalia is the reason why they went to the club, and the reason, you know, all the circumstances behind their marriage. Um, I don't know. You know, if I had to cast Adam, I almost wonder if I could get Don Knotts, you know, and but it makes the book sound like a comedy. And I think there are comic elements. There's, I think maybe more accurately, there's absurd elements. I do like the absurd. The absurd appeals to me. But what I was trying to do with some of the absurdism, and I do this in other books, is try to make you feel comfortable in a way until I start doing terrible things to the characters in some
but you're
cases.
trying to make me feel comfortable as a reader?
Yeah. In a
Really?
way, it's I don't know, a kind of misdirection, maybe.
Okay.
But
Okay.
it's the
Interesting.
kind of story I like to read. I enjoy things that have a small element of absurdism, and but also reach me on a deep, visceral level, and in the end, hopefully means something. Um,
Yeah.
I'm kind of
Interesting.
sad. I'm kind of sad you find Adam bland, but I kind of, I get where you're coming from with that, because in some ways it's just the
Well,
simplicity.
I mean, I get it. I totally get where you're coming from, and it wasn't like I didn't. I just found myself having a hard time rooting for him toward the end because he was just like, well, I always do that. And I don't know. I was just kind of like, Adam, come on, man, come on. Like I was trying to snap him out of it. I have to tell you though, if I would watch this movie in a second if you had done not because he was the master of sort of like it would be believably ridiculous if he
Yeah.
was in this role, and I think it could also be comedic and also horror at the same time. That's
Yeah.
such an interesting. Now, see if I were to read it now and think back on it with Don Knotts in the character, I would probably have a whole different experience because to me he was very like I just wanted him to like rise up. And I guess at the very end he sort of does. Now I do have a question for you. It surprised me when we got to the end and he's walking on the water. Like what did that symbolize? Like what when he finally did he like come into his power? Like what how that moment surprised me.
It's the transformation. It's the because we haven't talked about the ink, what the ink contains that is in his body.
That's true.
You know, it is, and it starts with a joke that that Moonshine, the magician, makes, where he says, "Maybe you can walk on water." And then
Mm.
when I wrote that, which is sort of as a whim, I figured later, well, of course he can walk on water. He's going to have to at some point. And it was that moment where it was a moment of heroism, because at that moment where he walks on the water, he's doing it in a selfless way.
That's
He's
true.
gone through the most terrible things, but to
Yeah.
walk on water, he's doing it for someone else, which of course doesn't work out really well in the end.
It
But
it really doesn't, and I'm like, really, Adam, you're gonna put your hand, really? But anyway, but I understood it. I got it. And then of course the end was truly like, but I have to tell you, see, for me, Doug, I'm not a horror guy. So once we got into that whole last chunk, I was like I was like, okay, I'm in. I mean, Doug is taking me to this place, that I don't usually go. So I have to tell you, I struggled because I'm not like a horror guy. I enjoyed it, I understood it, but I did have a hard time at the end just because of me.
well, using the humor, it's easier for me to lead you to the edge of the cliff and then push you off. And that's kind of what it is. The ending is a bit of a push off the cliff.
It definitely.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you, by the time we got to there, like I was like, yeah. I mean, of course we ended up here. You know what I mean? Like by the time, like once they start heading off to, is it Arcanum? How do you say that?
Arcanum, yes.
Arcanum. Once they start that whole part, I was like, okay, now I was like, I better put on my seatbelt. You know what I mean? Like I knew it was gonna go where it went, and it did. And I guess being a horror novel, it needed to. But anyway, it was a very interesting experience. I do really love how the tarot cards were so significant and what they meant, and I loved that part of the book. I thought that what I've learned about tarot cards since we opened the Phantom History House, I've enjoyed how you wove that in and how significant it was to the different characters. I thought that was maybe the coolest part of the whole thing to me.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Um, it is pretty directly tied in. And the book is part of a sequence, a cycle. It's the third part of a cycle, and it's not they're not sequels to one another, but I call them a cycle because they're kind of connected in terms of setting and mood, and in some cases characters overlap. But I started this cycle with a novella called The Reattachment, and all three of these were published by Madness Heart Press. The Reattachment also has a character in some ways similar to Adam, but a little more brusque, a little more confrontational with people, who loses his arm in an industrial accident. Speaking of sticking your hands in machinery, he
Yeah.
loses his arm, and the Reattachment, which is coming back into print fairly soon, his arm returns. The company, his former employer, sends a doctor to his house months after he's lost his arm, and the doctor says, "I have your arm. We found it. We're going to put it back on." And by the way, all that disability and unemployment you've taken, you really got to come back to work. So he has to go back to work with his new arm. But and this isn't too much of a spoiler. It's not exactly his arm, kind of his arm, not exactly his
I'm
arm.
expecting things might not go that well after that. If it's the
Yeah.
kind of book
So and that's set in I have a fictional county called Visaria County. And the second novel in that cycle is called Little Lugosi, a love story, which is about a pet leech, and also takes place in Visaria County. And another male character who sort of stumbles on some uncanny situation. In this case, his wife orders a leech for a pet, and the leech ties him into this cult that used to exist where he works. And
I can't believe your brain can come up with this stuff, Doug. That is so
fun. And then the trick is the third in the cycle. And in some ways, there's similar, like I said, similar settings. They don't
okay.
start in Visaria County in the trick, but they end up going towards Visaria County.
All right, so now I'm going to ask you a question that you don't have to answer. But is there any part of these male characters that you keep writing about that you feel like is you?
Yeah, I mean, I think all my characters are part of me. I mean, I think Natalia is somewhat reflective of me.
Okay.
And you know, I think in some cases good and bad. I have a novel called The Beasts of Visaria County, another novel set in Visaria County, where I think the main character in a lot of ways is me, and it's a woman. She is, she has a lot of my personality. She also has a lot of Jerlyn, my wife's personality. In fact, I borrowed little bits of Jerlyn's biography for her. It was kind of fun. Jerlyn loves that. She does some things that Jerlyn did in her childhood.
Oh, that's cool.
So I think it was Eudora Welty who said, and I have to paraphrase this, who said that when a writer is born, their family is doomed because they'll borrow things. And I'm definitely guilty of that. But I think the person I borrow the most from is me. And
Sure. Well, that makes sense to me. I just wondered if like this character who was sort of naive and like was sort of put into circumstances that suddenly made him right. Like I just wondered if you had ever felt like that was part of your story.
every day, man. I'm not a confrontational person. I don't like change. My wife will tell you I don't like changing things. And that's him. He doesn't like change. And
which made it all the more dramatic when this happened to his hand. Yeah, no, I get it.
yeah. So he is kind of me a little bit, but in a lot of ways not me. So it's just, you know, it's borrowing, picking things, and writing from experience in some cases, and so.
Yeah, well, I mean that makes perfect sense, and I would expect you to experiences you've had and the things that you bring to the table have to end up in your books, I think.
Yeah.
But
Adam
really
loves oil for one thing. I hate changing oil. Adam's really good at changing oil. And if you think about it, that working at the Grease and Go, it started sort of as a joke in the book. Where does he work? He works at the Grease and Go. But that became part of his standard practice because you do every car you treat the same. And, you know, he's got the shirt everywhere he goes. He wears his Grease and Go shirt, which, you know, I also had to figure out a way for Maripin to find him when she finds him. She said, well, you wore the Grease and Go shirt.
That's true. That was clever. Yeah, that made sense. Yeah, but you know, I don't know. To me, it made him all the more like, wow, man, like go get some shirts, man. You know, like yeah, but I understand. Like it sort of made the things that happened to him even more dramatic, and it's interesting what you decided to do with that.
In a way, that is me. You know, I didn't think about this till you said it, but Jerlyn points out I own black shirts. I don't like shirts that aren't black. And so in a way, this is my Grease and Go shirt, you know? So you just can't see
God, you're wearing a black. Well, I'm wearing a black shirt in your honor today too. So there you go.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, so what have you thought? Are you surprised by my reactions? Did this conversation go as you expected?
Yeah, I mean, well, I couldn't predict it. It sounds like you liked the book.
Yeah, I did. I have to tell you, I mean, I liked it a lot. Once we got into the scarier, gorier part at the end, I started to struggle just because that's me. That's not anything to do with the writing or the book. And I kind of expected that, but like I have to tell you, like that whole first half of it or whatever, when they're discovering the tarot cards and the clues, and like I was really, really in. Once we got in the truck and we're heading for Arcanum or whatever, I was like, okay, this is getting hard for me now because things start to go down, as you know, as you would know well. But
that's when I like story. I like stories that kind of veer in a direction where the dread builds, and that's kind of what I was going for.
You got me. The dread was building, everybody, like for sure. Yeah, I mean, I knew we were going there, And I
love road trips. Road trips. Everybody loves a road trip. No.
Yeah. I mean, but the situation behind this trip and where they were, like, that was all like, I was like, really? It's one of those things like in a horror movie when you're like, really, you're running toward the barn with all the saws, like it's that kind of thing. Like I was kind of like, okay, I guess I know why you're going, but I have a bad feeling about this. But anyway, I did enjoy the book, and I appreciate so much you stopping to talk through it with me. And this all happened because we have a book club now at Phantom History House, and everybody go to our website at phantomhistoryhouse.com. Look at the events, and you can find the book club stuff, and we hope that you'll join us. There's a virtual version and an in-person version. Doug, this has been really fun. Anything you want to say in wrapping up this conversation?
I have more stuff coming out. I will have a new novelette later this year called All the Dead Cats of Civilization. I have a new short story collection that came out earlier in the year called The Infection Party and Other Stories of Dis-ease. And I'm in a really cool, I can show you a minute.
Yeah.
Let me right back. I'm in this very cool charity book called Table for Three with Rebecca Rowland and Holly Ray Garcia. The proceeds for this book go to a Texas food bank. Each one of them is about people who are at food risk. And my novella in this is called The Last Slaughter. This came out recently. It's been a busy year for me. I have another little novelette called Babel, which I'm really proud of, also from Madness Heart Press. So my stuff is on Amazon. A lot of it's on Barnes & Noble and Godless. So hope people check it out.
All right, everybody. Douglas Ford, look up his stuff. I want to tell you, like, I enjoyed this book. I thought the setup was brilliant. And like I said, I was all in until we got to the really scary part. And then that was just me that like got really chickened out. But I think you did a great job. I would recommend it. And thanks for talking to me. This was fun.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Doug. Remember, you can see all kinds of great content on the Phantom History House YouTube channel, or just go to phantomhistory.com where you can find both the podcasts and more information about our bed and breakfast, the Phantom History House here in Tampa, Florida. I hope you'll come visit soon and we can talk ghost stories in our library.